So Rabbi Akiva, this is our first appearance of Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva says, Sachok v'kalot rosh margilin et ha'adam le'erva. That mockery, levity, goofing off, and lightheadedness, but being frivolity, right? Levity. Margilin, they wear a path, they accustom a person, right? It comes from the word to be ragil, right? To be, from your legs, from the walk. It makes you accustomed. It creates a pathway, right? Eta adam le'erva, to infidelity, to adultery, to immorality, right? Improper use of physicality and sexuality. Masorat saig l'Torah, that the Masorah, the teaching through handing over, right? The oral approach to the Torah, learning with a Rav, right? Is a saig l'Torah. It's a fence, a protection to the Torah. Maisros saig l'Osher, the giving tzedakah, giving meiser, that allocating 10% of your money, a percentage of your money to helping others, is a fence for wealth. Nadarim saig l'Prishus, the nadarim, that vows, right? Are a fence for abstinence. And saig l'Chachma shtika, and the fence for Chachma, for wisdom, is be quiet. Just silent. Don't talk all the time. Listen. Right? Shtika. So chok v'kalat rosh margilin et ha'adam le'erva. So what's the pathway to infidelity? What's the pathway to adultery, to immorality? So he says, you don't walk into a room and say, you and me. Right? That's not how it happens. Right? You don't just walk into your assistant or your secretary or your best friend's wife or your neighbor's wife and say, I think it's time that we commit adultery. It's not the way it happens. But in normal life, that's not, it's not the way it happens. He says, this idea of, you'll see amongst our community, many people, you'll see, they'll address other people's wives as Mrs. something. Right? And it seems like an unusual formality. Right? How are you, Mrs. Goldberg? How are you, it's Mrs. Because one, you're instantly, when you call that, you're recognizing that this person has a position of respect, but that this person is already attached to a person, right? You're recognizing her in her relationship to her husband, and you're creating a level of formality. Because the way you approach, the way you start an affair is you joke, right? You can't just walk up and say, hey, would you like to do this? You want to figure out, how are you going to be received? Is the girl going to slap you? Or is she going to think about it? Right? That people enter into corruption, right? How often, someone will say something and you'll give them a look and they'll say, just kidding. Right? There's a level of testing the waters, that you have walls of propriety, and propriety is easily breached two ways. One is mocking those rules, right? And two is treating things like everything is lighthearted, right? You see, it's interesting that, we create this system where part of the way we protect marital fidelity is we try to diminish. We saw the preceding mission that says, al tarbe sicha ma'isha, right? Sicha is emotional conversation. Don't overindulge in lighthearted emotional conversation with your wife, even more so someone else's wife, right? Conversation whose purpose it is to create an emotional connection to a person. Right? You don't want to do that to someone else's wife. You have no particular reason why you need to build, a bond to them. And you start using that conversation, you start using jokingness and familiarity and levity to draw her soul to your soul, to draw her to you. And then to test boundaries and move boundaries and push boundaries so that you can slowly slip into what you want to do. It says most major issues, these failings that people have, they don't just sit down and jump into them, right? People, it's much easier to ease into the water, right? Most people are very uncomfortable jumping into a very cold pool. They work their way into a cold pool. I happen to prefer to jump because I hate cold. But this idea of immorality, that it's a gateway, he says it's a gateway drug. right? That first you break down the formality, and you break down the boundaries, and you test the waters, and you lead your way into this. So that's why, we tend to don't put yourself in a position where you're alone with a woman. Don't put yourself in a position where you touch a woman. Don't put yourself in a position where you're joking and flirting with a woman. Don't put yourself in a position, I know it takes most of the fun out of your day, but it will save you a tremendous amount of danger. You're certainly not going to have an affair with a girl that you never flirt with, right? You're certainly not going to have an affair with a woman that you don't become overly familiar to, right? The issue is that you have to, remember one of our Rebbeim saying he's opposed to the concept of double dating, right? Of you and another couple going out on any sort of regular dating basis. And he says, why? Because when you're at home, you're worried about bills and kids and mess, and did you put it in the dishwasher, and did you mop the floor, and did you do this, and when you're out on a double date, everyone's on their best behavior, and you get to look at her, the other guy's wife, and see how, you don't notice your wife is funny and cute and entertaining, because you see her all the time, but you certainly notice that his wife is funny and cute and entertaining, right? And you're thinking, my wife's not as good as that wife, right? And she's thinking, my husband's not as good as that husband. And everyone's on their best behavior, and you're looking at the other person, and it creates opportunities, right? It doesn't mean you can't have friends, doesn't mean you can't, but it says you have to be careful, right? We have a society, I mean, again, within our own particular niche, some places we're taking it a little bit too far, right? You go to your kids' parent conferences, and you're not allowed to sit with your co-parent, right? There's places you can take it too far, but the idea is it's a danger. Very few things are as dangerous as intimacy. As a person wanting to have a connection, your soul is dying for connection to other people. And your Yetzer Hara can lead that astray by bringing you into inappropriate connections. And now what you're doing is, to the extent that that woman is drawn to you, you've now drawn her away from her own husband. Right? It's inappropriate. She should not be... I have a friend who's now getting divorced, but you could almost see it coming when his wife, started riding her bike with another guy. Right, started like other people were luring. She started spending her entertainment time with another person, other people, and it's disastrous because that guy doesn't have to pay bills. That guy has there's no way a real husband can compare to the, Sunday morning recreational husband, right? There's no way a real wife can compare to the concubine wife. It's just not going to happen, and you're creating a pathway. He says these rather things talk about a fence. This is the opposite of a fence, right? This is a water slide, right? This is a water slide into immorality. So that's, right? And the fence is, don't get involved in this. Fence is keep a level of formality. You see your friend and you say, how are you, Mrs. Goldberg, right? And you can be friends with them. I'm not saying you can't have any sort of intergender connection, but we're at least rational enough to recognize that there is such a thing as adultery, and it happens to good people, and it doesn't mean that you're an evil person, and it's not people who there are some people who are lechers and just set out to be party animals, but most of the most destructive stuff is nice, normal, regular people who happen to step into a path that leads them to destruction. It's a path to destruction, to erva. Masoret, right, Saig L'Torah, that the Masorah is a fence, right? So now he's talked about the first thing is backwards entrance to the fence. He says, here's the thing that's going to lead you. So if you look at each of these are how to protect something that's important, right? The Masorah. So what's the Masorah? So we saw in the first mission, the first parak, it says, right? Use the word either kibel or use the word masruha, right? Masorah is the passing over, the teaching of in a pure way, right? When it says Moshe kibel Torah misinu Masorah leYeshua. Right, Masorah Yeshua means he passed it to Yeshua in a pure fashion. Right, Moshe kibel Torah misina. We said Moshe received the Torah because he received what he was capable of, not what this teacher was capable of teaching him. Right, what Moshe received in the Torah was not what Hashem was capable of teaching him. It was what Moshe was capable of receiving. So whenever you see an Avos use the word kibel, you have to assume that there's a loss from teacher to student. Whenever you see Masorah, you have to assume there's no loss from teacher to student. Right, when Moshe handed it to Joshua, Joshua didn't just get what he was capable of. Joshua got everything that Moshe was able to teach. Right? The idea of Masorah, of that we pass Torah down through my Rav teaches me, and he explains it to me, and then I give it back to him, or I argue with him, or I question him, and he says, no, you're a numbskull, you didn't get it, and he slaps me twice, and he goes back over it again. Really not. But you go back and forth, and it's a whole oral body of law. It's not just, handing you over a written note saying this is what it is. Right? You see the people, on the other team who have nothing but the handwritten notes, and their approach to everything is wrong. They don't understand what's actually getting at. The purpose of oral law, of our approach to teaching, is that you have a Rav that you can sit with and discuss it with and work through it with until he's certain that you really have it. Right? Otherwise, there's no telling what corruption comes from I read the words one way and you read the words another way. Right? Where you have offense, where you have success is you give us over the notes and I read it one way and he reads it another way and we explain it back to you and you say, no, that's not correct. This is the way it works. This is what I'm getting at. This is how you apply the case. Here's how the pieces fit together. And it's taught, right? The same thing that, I'm not sure if you would want to say, I'm going to hire a surgeon, right, who happened to borrow all of the books from medical school from his roommate. And he read them all, right? His roommate went to medical school. He read all the books. Do you want that guy operating on you or not? Not only did I read the books, but the professors happened to put all the videos up on Khan Academy, and I watched all the videos too. Do you want that guy operating on you? Right? You go and sit with your surgeon, and he walks in with 3 people trailing him. Because they walk around with, for years before they're allowed to touch you. They walk around with a real surgeon, listening to him and watching him and asking questions. And he does this, and they say, why that way? And then they step in and do something, and he says, no, this way, no, that way. And that if the level of learning is life-altering enough and important enough, then it's done in a form of Masorah. It's done with a teacher who can hand it to you and observe you and correct you so that there's no loss as it transfers from generation to generation. That's Masorah. Meiser saig la'osher. That Meiser, tithing, is offense to wealth. So I've seen this read a couple of different ways. So the way I prefer it is if you take the next chapter, it says, what is wealth? Right? Who's rich? A person is sameach lehelko. Right? That wealth is not necessarily a product of how much you have, although it is possible that when you're below a certain threshold, it doesn't matter how happy you are, you're not going to feel wealthy. That's a separate question, right? But the idea of what's Meiser? Meiser is every time I receive money, if I earn $1,000, I allocate $100 of that towards other people's lives. $100 that is going towards shuls, towards food, towards poor people, towards, right? I mean, there's what, Meiser Kasavim, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. But the reality is I recognize that my gifts that come to me come along with an obligation to others. And it says that's offense 2 different ways. You can read it as the Malachite promise, where God says, if you give, I'll give to you. Right? God promises us that you can test him. If you're really good about meisering, he says he'll make you rich. Right? It's harder sometimes to see because you see guys that are really good at meiser but don't have piles of money. But maybe the rich is the Sameach B'Helko rich. That to the extent that you focus your life, that we had a couple of guys who used to come to this class, to our Thursday class, whose grandfather had earned many hundreds of millions of dollars, and whose father had preserved the fortune. And now the 2 boys grew up. And one of the boys told me, he says, as I grew up, I recognized that there was no amount of money that I would ever earn in my life, nothing that would make any material difference to my life. Because even if I earned $100 million, the difference between me having $300 million and $400 million isn't going to make a material difference to anything that I do. Right? There was no job I could do. I couldn't clean the house. We had 4,000 maids. Right? They owned hotels. We had housekeeping staffs. Right? Couldn't garden. We had gardening staffs. I couldn't fix the car. There was nothing that he was necessary for. Right? Nothing. So I figured the one thing I could do in life is I could eat stuff and drink stuff and smoke stuff and break stuff. And that's what I could do. And I became very, very good at eating stuff, smoking stuff, and breaking stuff. Because how else am I going to make any sort of impact in life? Right? Until he discovered philanthropy. When he discovered giving it away, now you can be Bill Gates. You can give away $50 billion. Right? If you're a good guy like Bill Gates and Melinda Gates, and you identify the problems you want to solve, and you can be the richest guy who has ever existed on the planet, and you can give away more money than anyone's ever given away, and you can do it in an intelligent, targeted way that you're very careful as to where it goes and who runs it and who administers and how it's done, and still find that you can barely make an impact on the problems you're trying to solve. And at that point, there's no longer a question of the money, extra money I earn means nothing. If I'm the guy who's the steward in charge of deploying properly, right? Grandfather was in charge of earning. My job is deploying. Now I got something that's meaningful. When we did this Mishnah with him a number of years ago, he said this was his life. That Meiser was the guard for wealth. That wealth can destroy you. Wealth can destroy your kids. And I've got a friend who's unfortunately is so rich that his 21-year-old kid figures that his proper life is to be a professional gambler. Right? He can't get his kid to do anything because what doesn't he do anything for? He's got more money in his trust fund than he'll ever know what to do with. And he's trying to figure out what to do with his son. Like, how did I ruin my kid? It's like, let's go down the list. But you broke your kid. It says, Meiser protects you from wealth. If you are a rich guy, it doesn't matter whether you got $100 million or $1 billion or $10 billion, that if you recognize that every dollar you earn has a claim on it and brings with it a responsibility to touch and change the world, it's just not what you become. Right? That Meiser, recognizing that wealth brings obligation, and actually going out into the world and meeting that obligation and using your money to do good, inoculates you and inoculates your kids against the destruction of having access to those resources. Because you recognize that those resources do make a demand on you. They make a demand that you use them properly. Right? So that's money and wealth. Nadarim saig leparishus. So this one actually comes from a different era. A neder is a promise, right? It's a commitment. It's a verbalization of a commitment. That's why you get to Yom Kippur and we say, Kol nidrei, right? All the promises I made to Hashem, right? Let's take them away. Let them be nullified so I can get a fresh start into this year. That we believe, we talked before, mind, speech, and body. Right? Your mind is your fundamental tool for connecting and working with yourself. Speech is your fundamental tool for connecting to God. And body, action, is your fundamental tool for connecting to other people. Speech can be an action as well. If I walk up to you and tell a little kid he's a doofus, I can damage him with speech. But it's that physical interaction that's doing it. Right? The speech is just my will made manifest that's really harming him. But the fundamental level of connection to God is through speech. Right? You marry a person by saying, Harei am kadeshet li. You change her status. You daven tefillas with speech, or you can make a neder. You can come and say, this is as treif to me as. Right? You can make a promise or a commitment to do something, and that's real. So we live in an era that our words mean nothing. But in the era of the Mishnah, the person said, if you have a person who is struggling tremendously with the Yetzer Hara to do something, right? It says, if a person made a neder, Jews did not break nedarim. We're men of our word. Right? I may be struggling with whether or not I'm going to watch too much TV, but if I made a neder that said I'm not going to watch TV, now it's done. The same way that I'm not going to eat treif and murder people, I'm not going to break a neder. I've created a halachic boundary as a tool of will, right? So we're in a different era, but in an era of honest men whose words meant something, your will made manifest through speech meant something. And a guy who's trying to abstain from a certain pathway in his life, right? Who said, I'm not even taking Averas, because you're not going to do an Avera, but there's thieves, right? I am not going to do this anymore. This is not how I'm going to waste my day. If you made an oath, if you promised you weren't going to do that, and you promised Hashem you weren't going to do it, you didn't do it. It's a fence, it's a tool for it. Speech is will made manifest. A neder was a tool for making your will solidify. Right? It's generally recommended in our era that we don't make nedarim, because we're just weak people. And now you'll not only make the mistake that you didn't want to do, but you're now over a neder as well. You're just adding on the destruction, because We're just not strong enough to say, I promised, right? There are people who will enter into a deal, they'll promise you they're going to do something, and they will do it. Even if it turns out that it doesn't work out the way they thought it was going to be, and it's disadvantageous, but you know what? I promised you I would do this, I will do this, because I do what I say. Right? That's not our generation. Our generation is, I didn't mean it, you know what, I was mistaken, I didn't have all the facts, right? Just leave me alone, don't notice, go away, I don't like you, right? And we don't hold to our word. But in the time of the Mishnah, that offense for if you had really a taiva, you had a drive that you were opposed to, you could make a neder. And that neder created a concreteness to your will that created offense. Saying l'chachma shtika. And the fence for chachma, for wisdom, the thing that helps you preserve your wisdom, is just shut up. Right? Just be quiet. You know, people are so focused on they have to hear their own voice. Right? They always have to have the last word. That no matter what's said, they have to voice an opinion on it. Right? Sometimes we don't really need to hear what you have to say. You don't need to hear what you have to say. You don't have to have an opinion on everything. You don't have to be the final word on everything. That if you want to learn, find a place where whatever it is, whether it's business or philosophy or girls or marriage or kids or whatever, if you can find somebody who understands more than you do, just be quiet and listen. Right? We saw the preceding mission, a couple parakim ago, that says, you know, Kol yemei gadalti ben chachamim. Right? All my days I grew amongst the chachamim, and I never found anything better for a body than silence. Right? If you want to become a chacham, you become a chacham by recognizing you don't know everything, and that the guys around you probably know something. So as long as I stop and listen, I will continually be accruing all the some things that they know, and I will be growing. Right? You know, who's the famous saying that says, you know, better to keep your mouth shut and be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt? Right? Sometimes, you know, you just don't need to jump in. So that's our Mishnah.